Now, though, let's turn to the stories I mentioned earlier about the police and whether they've been overreaching. Two incidents, of course, some to question. Whether they've got the priorities right. I mentioned the case of a couple of parents in Hertfordshire who were arrested over complaints they made about their daughter's primary school. 6 police officers turned up at their home, arrested them on suspicion of harassment, malicious communications and causing a nuisance. Hertfordshire police are now carrying out rapid and thorough reviews of how the events unfolded. Separately to that story, Quakers in Britain are saying the arrests of 6 members of the activist group Youth Demand during a meeting at one of their properties is an aggressive violation. The Metropolitan Police said the arrests had come over plans to shut down London next month. Youth Demand, which describes itself as a new youth resistance campaign fighting for an end to genocide, began carrying out acts of civil disobedience last year. Hala Sabbah is a spokesperson for Youth Demand and joins us now. Hello, Hala.
Hi, how are you?
I'm very well. Thank you so much for joining us. First of all, I just mentioned just in one short line there what it is that Youth Demand stand for. What is your mission statement? And let's just start there.
So the mission is to do a total arms embargo to Israel and for the rich to pay £1 trillion in compensation for the climate activities that have been done.
When you say the rich, who do you mean?
I mean oil companies. I mean any organization that is involved in climate change.
So this meeting then at this, Quaker residence, you weren't there, I'm told, but what was being discussed at that meeting? What was that meeting actually about?
That was a meeting to discuss the activities in April in order to achieve the 2 missions that we just discussed.
And what were the activities that were being planned?
The activities that were being planned are non-violent civil resistance.
Okay. Can you give us any more information as to how you were going to... Because, the phrase shut down London sounds quite dramatic.
Is it dramatic enough to arrest people while they're having a meeting? Is this where the state is going, that when people are discussing something, they get arrested just for sitting and thinking or sitting and talking? This is the real issue here. It's not about the activities that are being done as much as it is for the police repression that we are witnessing today.
Well, the police say that they've got a responsibility to intervene to prevent activity, these are their words, that crosses the line from protest into serious disruption and other criminality. That's what they've said. You're saying that freedom of speech is under threat here. But when it comes to protest, everyone's got a right to protest, but you have to work with the police, don't you?
I think I would happily work with the police if the police was not complicit in genocide, right? This is a government and a system that is actively working and supporting genocide. So the question here really is, do we accept over 100,000 people being murdered and almost 1,000 people being murdered in the last 2 weeks alone with a country that happily provides them with arms? Or are we here to discuss disruption and rights and freedom of speech? Because these young people in Youth Demand are ordinary people who simply saw killings over and over and over on their screens for over 17 months. And they thought to themselves, this is not okay.
I understand your motivation, Hala. I totally get what you're saying in terms of your motivation for shutting down London. But we are actually talking about the freedom of speech element here. You mentioned, you said that the police are supporting genocide. How are the UK police supporting genocide?
How are the UK police?
Yes.
Well, it's quite simple. The police is part of this government. This government is complicit in genocide. And when the police are standing against people who are trying to protest or who are trying to speak up about genocide, then that makes them complicit in genocide. It's a very obvious thing.
So Youth Demand's angle on this is that if you don't agree with how the police works or how the government works, you're then breaking the law in order to achieve your aims.
We broke the law by meeting up and having
No,
a discussion.
I'm not saying about this. I'm saying is that your intention here? Because if you won't work with the police, that's a whole different problem that's being created, isn't it?
Rima, my question to you is that you're sitting here trying to find an issue about a group of young people sitting in a room and having a discussion.
We're going to get into that, though. We're going to talk about the discussion. I'm talking about youth demand and what your aims are and how you get to those aims. I'm trying to understand why 6 young people would be arrested, and there are questions to be asked of the police.
That's a question to ask the police, not to ask the 6 young people who are sitting and having a discussion. I mean, it's really, really shocking that a supposedly democratic country is arresting young people simply for sitting in a room and just having a discussion. The Quaker community itself said that this has never happened in the history of the Quaker community, that people just walked in, stormed and raided and arrested people simply for sitting and having a discussion. I mean, this is the issue here. The issue is not what might happen or what's going to happen. The issue is that a simple conversation is being repressed. And the reasons behind, and I don't think the reasons are, or the motivation is irrelevant to this conversation. I think it's central to this conversation that we live in a country that supports the death of 100,000 people. I think this should be the central conversation here. And I think when you see that all the governments with no exception in the world are silent and haven't taken any serious action, and you have most politicians sitting there in shameful silence, it actually gives us some faith in humanity that these young people, young ordinary people in youth demand, standing up against these governments and saying this is not okay.
Well, let's bring in Danny Shaw here, hello, Home Affairs commentator, former advisor to the Home Secretary, Yvette Cooper. Welcome, Danny.
Hello, Rima. Good morning.
Thank you for being with us. Now, Hala's making the point here that it doesn't matter really what they were talking about in this meeting, these 6 young people. The police don't have any right to go in and arrest them for something that they haven't done yet.
Well, that's not quite right. I mean, look, I want to say, first of all, I don't know all the circumstances of this case. We've seen various statements from the Quakers and from Youth Demand and from the Metropolitan Police, and we don't know all the information. But let's just say that the Met Police had viable intelligence that a group of people were planning to disrupt London, let's just say, by cutting supplies to the electricity network or to the water network. Let's just say that, for instance. That would count as serious disruption had that gone ahead, and would obviously cause huge inconvenience and disruption to thousands of people. Would they be entitled in those circumstances, if they had information that a group was plotting that, to go and make some arrests? I think most right-minded people would say that they would, because we know that if people are plotting criminal activities, conspiring equals plotting, the police have a right and they have the powers to make arrests in those circumstances. So of course they do. If the police simply heard that a group of people were having a discussion, no more than that, about non-violent protest, I don't think they would have a right to go in and make arrests. We don't. So that's where there is a difference. And you know, I totally take the point that Hala is making, that these people were simply having a discussion. If they were simply having a discussion and nothing more than that, then I think the police have completely overstepped and overreached their powers. But if they were plotting illegal activities or crimes, that's something very different.
I mean, the question here as well is, don't the police have to be realistic about certain things? Because we're talking about Youth Demand, where what we know about them is that they have carried out acts of civil disobedience over the last year. But, I mean, do they really have the resource to shut down London? Is it a bit heavy-handed to send in police officers to 6 young people eating hummus and breadsticks in a Quaker church?
We don't know what the intelligence was that the Met has and how good that intelligence was. But the fact that they had sent in 30 officers, apparently some had tasers, and that they've made 6 arrests, and I think and 10 arrests in all. 6 were made on that particular day. Of those 10 arrests, I think 11 arrests, sorry, in all 10 people have been bailed and one person has been released without further action, suggests that there are some inquiries and investigations that need to take place. Look, the use of police powers can be very ugly and traumatic and upsetting for the people who are subject to it. There's no doubt about that. It's not pretty. If the police suspect that there's a crime taking place, then they can't sort of give people 48 hours notice and saying, listen, we're going to be coming round at 3 o'clock
Sure, yeah, that's understandable.
on Wednesday afternoon. Would you mind terribly if we come and have a search of the premises? That's not the way it works. If police suspect there's a crime and a potentially serious crime taking place, they have to use their powers in a way which can be regarded as a bit heavy-handed. But it's all about the intelligence and whether police were justified in acting on that intelligence or not. And we simply don't know that at this moment for
Well,
obvious reasons.
on that note of heavy-handedness and also the optics at any point of police raids, quote unquote. Let's talk about this other story, which you might have heard, Danny. This WhatsApp story, kind of astonishing, where these parents have basically been complaining about the school. They have been on WhatsApp. We don't know what was in those WhatsApp messages, but 6 police officers have turned up at their home and arrested them, and they're now carrying out a review. They've since been let free. What do you make of that? 6 police officers turning up to someone's home
Well, yeah.
for WhatsApp messages.
I mean, on the face of this, and given the facts that we've seen at the moment, and I always just put this caveat is because if you've been in journalism for a while, you know that facts emerge later on that you didn't know about at the time. But from what we know at the moment, it looks like a completely egregious use of police powers and completely unnecessary for the police to get involved in this way in a dispute, what appears to be a sort of quite a nasty dispute between parents and a school. But it is not something for the police to get involved in. At the very most, perhaps it's a phone call to those involved to say, look, this is causing upset. You might want to think about toning some of this down or trying to resolve it amicably. It is not 6 officers going round to one address.
Well, Alan in Coventry has got in touch with a really good point. He says, when police resources are low, how does it take 6 officers to arrest a family who may have genuine complaints about school? Again, we don't know what they actually put in these messages, but 6, I mean, the optics of it are terrible.
No, absolutely. And I think what this is about is there's a lack of experience in the police service at the moment. About 1/3 of all the officers across England and Wales have less than 5 years in service because a huge number of experienced officers left. There was a big recruitment campaign, and that's what we've got. So I think you've got a lack of experience. I don't think you have so many older, wiser heads who can put restraints down and say, oh, hang on a minute, where's the person going? Hang on a minute, what are we doing? Sending half a dozen officers around to this couple in a sort of a dispute between a school and some parents. I think that there aren't any of those wiser heads. And I also think there's a kind of fear among some officers that if they don't act, then things can escalate and then they'll be held to account. Now, on that, I do have some sympathy with the police because we know that some disputes start off with verbals between people and then they can escalate into something more serious.
Absolutely.
But
We don't know what was it.
6 off.
Yeah, we don't know what was in those messages. But, it would be if we knew what was in them and if they were, making threats against those people. It makes, you can sort of flesh out a story more on that front. Taking both of those events together, the youth demand arrests at that Quaker house and also this, WhatsApp story. Are people who are concerned about freedom of speech being under threat, are they justified here, do you think, given what we've seen?
I think they're really 2 very different examples, I have to be honest. I mean, I think the Hertfordshire example is really concerning on the face of it, unless some other facts emerge that we don't know about. And it does smack of heavy-handedness, and I'm very pleased that Hertfordshire Police are doing a review, and I expect that, that will probably show that they got things out of proportion in that case. I'm not so convinced about the Quaker raid. I know it's extremely unfortunate that the Quakers, with this history of working for peace, disarmament, prison reform, and so on, have had a meeting in one of their premises, and it's been raided. We just don't know the intelligence, and it's a fact that a lot of the stuff that doesn't happen, a lot of the crimes that don't get committed, a lot of the disruption that doesn't happen is because police, intelligence services, and others take preemptive action that we don't hear about or isn't trumpeted for obvious reasons. It might be that this is one of those cases. It could be that the police have got things a bit wrong. But on that one, I think the jury's still out.
Yeah, and I think that, I mean, we're getting so many messages in through this morning as well of people saying, well, there's this message saying both episodes were overreach by the police, I think. In the case of the group of women, the police could have held that information and waited to see if they actually committed a crime and then use that as evidence that it was planned. But they shouldn't be convicted of causing a riot when it actually hasn't happened. That's Lucy from Somerset. I think the concern here, Danny, is the sort of like, did you ever watch the film Minority Report? Where it's sort of like arresting people before they ever even commit a crime. It's set in the future. It's a bit sci-fi, but I think that's the worry here, that we get into a situation allegorically a bit like that.
Well, that's right, Rima. But then on the other hand, just imagine we get to a situation where there's huge disruption caused and power supplies curtailed or cut off, and because of protest groups, and people will be saying, well, where was the intelligence? Why didn't why didn't the police have tabs on these groups? Why weren't we know that there were arrests and there were convictions of this group for a protest outside Sir Keir Starmer's house in North London, I think last year. 3 people were convicted of that. Why, people will be asking that question, well, why didn't the police have intelligence about these groups if they're committing criminal offences? The police don't make the law. The police enforce the law, by the way. And, I think there needs to be a distinction between that. So, I think this is very difficult to call without knowing all the facts. On that particular one, on the Quaker raid. And I don't think we should get carried away. But everyone got extremely concerned about the protest, the Just Stop Oil protest that basically brought the M25 to a standstill. People couldn't get to funerals. They couldn't get to hospital appointments. It caused massive disruption for a number of hours. I think there was a police officer who was actually injured trying to deal with the cars and so on that were backing up, etc., on the motorway. If the police had intelligence that was going to happen, do you think they shouldn't have acted on it? Of course they should have done. So, these are the dilemmas that the police have and they have to deal with.
Like you say, though, we don't know what it was that they knew. Danny Shaw, Home Affairs commentator, former advisor to the Home Secretary Yvette Cooper, thank you very much for being with us. Also with us earlier, Hala Sabbah, who's a spokesperson for Youth Demand. What do you reckon? Get in touch, 85058. Some messages from you coming in. Alan in Coventry says, actually, I've already read Alan's. Sam says, 6 policemen sent to arrest those parents. Usually we don't see one. What a waste of money. Mike in Aberdeen says, why are the Quakers being complicit with anarchists? Andy agreeing. If the Quakers have decided to choose a side in the conflict between Israel and Palestinian militant groups and take part in illegal acts, then they are no longer pacifists. What do you make of both of those stories? Very different stories, but we are talking primarily about police overreach and whether that has been the case in both of those stories. Like I said, get in touch in all of the usual ways. It is Rima Ahmed in for Naga this morning. Welcome to 5 Live. It's time for our news bulletins now with Shojo Saka.